British rock star of the 1960s, tapping into counterculture in America and around the world. Part 2 now of my Sunday sit-down with Mick Jagger.
6 decades on stage, millions of fans, endless noise. But behind the strut, the swagger, and the myth, Mick Jagger wasn't just breaking hearts, he was looking for something real. Fame makes a man an icon, but the people he loved made him who he actually is. Beyond the stadium lights and the wild rumors, only a select few truly held the keys to his world. Here are the 5 who mattered most, and 5 people Jagger loved most. Marianne Faithfull, the muse who remade the myth. Before the massive world tours, before the corporate stadium setups, and before the Rolling Stones became a global institution, Mick Jagger was a working-class kid from Dartford trying to figure out who he was supposed to be on stage. Enter Marianne Faithfull. When they first crossed paths in 1964 at a record release party, she was barely 17 years old, possessing an ethereal, delicate beauty and an aristocratic lineage that instantly stopped him in his tracks. But while the world saw a quiet, soft-spoken blonde pop starlet, Jagger saw something far more dangerous, alluring, and deeply captivating. A true intellectual match, who was entirely unimpressed by his growing rock star bravado. Their romantic connection took off in the high-pressure cooker of mid-60s London. This was the absolute peak of the counterculture revolution, and together, Mick and Marianne quickly became its undisputed royalty. They were everywhere. Photographed leaving exclusive Mayfair clubs, hiding out in rural country manors, and constantly pushing the boundaries of art, fashion, and societal norms. But their bond was never just about standing in front of paparazzi cameras or showing off matching velvet suits. It was built on a deep, shared artistic obsession that fundamentally reshaped how Jagger viewed music, poetry, and his own evolving identity. Why did he love her so deeply? Because Marianne was never just along for the ride. She actively transformed his creative mind. She introduced him to heavy European literature, hand-delivering the translation of Mikhail Bulgakov's The Master and Margarita, that directly inspired one of the Rolling Stones' absolute masterpieces, Sympathy for the Devil. She brought classical poetry, avant-garde cinema, and complex existential thought into his world. Up until Marianne, Jagger was writing basic blues-infused pop lyrics about teenage angst. With her guidance, his writing expanded into dark, cinematic storytelling with real literary weight. They were co-creators sitting on hotel floorboards late into the night, trading ideas, refining melodies, and dissecting the changing world around them. In fact, she co-wrote the haunting track Sister Morphine, a song that captured the raw, bleeding edge of their shared life, even if it took years of legal battles for her to receive her proper official songwriting credit. He loved her because she challenged him at a time when everyone else in his inner circle was simply nodding along to everything he said. She had a sharp, uncompromising mind that forced him to grow up fast. She saw right past the emerging Mick Jagger stage persona and forced the man behind it to engage with real literature, real politics, and real emotional depth. She gave the Rolling Stones an intellectual credibility that elevated them far above standard pop star contemporaries of the era. When the idyllic promise of the late 60s began to unravel, their world spun violently out of control alongside it. The infamous 1967 raid at Keith Richards' Redlands estate turned Mick and Marianne into prime targets for the British legal establishment.
Lord Parker also said that whether he liked it or not, Jagger was the idol of a large number of young people. He had grave responsibilities. He will not only be punished for that offence, but brought back and punished for this one.
The tabloid media dragged Marianne through the mud with relentless fervor, turning her into a public scandal while treating Jagger like a charismatic rebel hero. The sheer weight of police surveillance, public judgment, relentless media hostility, and mounting personal pressures began tearing away at the seams of their relationship. Marianne started slipping deeper into her own severe addiction struggles, while Mick scrambled to protect his expanding music empire and keep the band from imploding under the legal strain. By 1970, the relationship reached its breaking point. Marianne walked away, leaving behind emotional scars that would take decades for both of them to fully understand. Yet, despite the chaotic, heartbreaking end of their romantic era, Jagger's deep reverence for Marianne never truly vanished. He watched her battle back from extreme poverty and addiction on the streets of Soho to rebuild her career into an acclaimed, gravel-voiced solo artist in her own right. He didn't just love her for her beauty or her social standing. He loved her because she was the very catalyst that turned a swaggering blues singer into a sophisticated lyricist and a true cultural pioneer. Without Marianne Faithfull pushing his intellectual boundaries during those critical formative years, the Mick Jagger we know today simply wouldn't exist. How do you follow a counterculture romance that reshaped your entire artistic soul? You step out of the London fog and straight into the glittering world of international high society. Bianca Jagger, the glamour, the match, and the Studio 54 era. If Marianne Faithfull was the bohemian muse who awakened Mick Jagger's artistic mind, Bianca Perez Mora Matias was the lightning bolt that thrust him directly onto the world's elite social stage. By 1970, the Rolling Stones were no longer just a hot British blues band. They were tax exiles, international jet-setters, and the biggest rock act on the planet. Jagger wasn't just looking for another romance, he needed an equal, someone whose presence, style, and fierce independence could match his towering global persona. When he met the Nicaraguan-born diplomat's daughter at a party in Paris, he didn't just find a partner. He met his precise mirror image. Their May 1971 wedding in Saint-Tropez immediately entered pop culture mythology as the ultimate rock and roll spectacle. Paparazzi swam through harbor waters, celebrity guests swarmed the small chapel, and Bianca famously walked down the aisle, pregnant, wearing a tailored white Saint Laurent smoking jacket with nothing underneath. It was daring, unapologetic, and effortlessly iconic. Almost overnight, Mick and Bianca became the undisputed ruling couple of the decade, floating effortlessly between private jets, French villas, and the velvet-roped sanctuary of Studio 54 in New York City. Why did he love her? Because Bianca was never intimidated by the shadow of Mick Jagger. She was fiercely intelligent, educated at the Paris Institute of Political Studies, and carried an innate royal confidence that commanded respect in every room she entered. Up until Bianca, Jagger was the undisputed center of attention wherever he went. Bianca changed that equation instantly. She was just as striking, just as photogenic, and just as capable of turning heads. Jagger was utterly fascinated by a woman who wouldn't bow to his stardom. In an era where rock stars expected partners to quietly wait backstage, Bianca demanded to stand directly beside him as a full partner in style, influence, and charisma. He loved her because she raised his status from a working-class English musician to a genuine international aristocrat. Together, they navigated the highest tiers of global society, socializing with artists like Andy Warhol, political figures, and European royalty. Bianca gave Jagger an entree into high fashion and avant-garde art that refined his taste and elevated his personal brand. She was sharp, witty, and possessed an exquisite aesthetic eye that influenced everything from his personal wardrobe to his public image. For Mick, loving Bianca was about loving a peer who matched his insane ambition and possessed the same magnetic draw on the world stage. However, having two absolute suns in the same solar system made their marriage notoriously volatile. The very qualities that drew them together, fierce independence, burning ambition, and a refusal to back down, eventually created insurmountable friction. Jagger's non-stop touring schedule, his deeply ingrained bachelor habits, and the relentless temptations of life on the road clashed directly with Bianca's demand for genuine fidelity and equal respect. As the 70s progressed, their private life degenerated into a high-profile war of attrition played out across international tabloids, culminating in a bitter, highly publicized divorce in 1979. Yet, despite the painful collapse of their marriage, the bond they shared through their daughter, Jade, and their joint legacy as the defining couple of the 70s remained permanent. Bianca would go on to become a world-renowned human rights advocate and council member for the Amnesty International USA Leadership Council, proving that her substance always matched her extraordinary style. Jagger's love for Bianca was a wild, passionate collision of two unstoppable forces at the absolute peak of their youth and power. She showed him what it meant to live as true international royalty, proving that love could be just as fierce, glamorous, and unforgettable as any stadium anthem he ever wrote. When the wildfires of the 70s jet-set lifestyle finally burned out, Mick needed something entirely different to survive the next 2 decades. A woman who could bring warmth, stability, and endless humor into his chaotic world. Jerry Hall, the long-haul partner and domestic anchor. If the 70s was a runaway freight train of stadium tours, high society parties, and international chaos, Jerry Hall was the woman who built a home right in the center of the storm. By the late 70s, Mick Jagger was 34 years old, divorced, and thoroughly accustomed to getting whatever he wanted. Enter a leggy, 6-foot-tall blonde supermodel from Texas who possessed an infectious Southern charm, a sharp sense of humor, and zero tolerance for pretension. When they met in 1977, Hall was already a major star in the fashion world, engaged to rock royalty Bryan Ferry. But the instant sparks between Jerry and Mick ignited a partnership that would last over 2 decades. For 22 years, Jerry Hall did what no other woman in history managed to pull off. She domesticated the ultimate wild bachelor of rock and roll. They raised 4 children together, Elizabeth, James, Georgia May, and Gabriel, inside a bustling estate in Richmond Hill, London. Behind closed doors, away from the screaming stadium crowds, their household wasn't run like a rock and roll circus. It was run with clear rules, warmth, and family dinners. Hall insisted on giving their children a grounded upbringing, complete with strict routines and chores, while Mick happily slipped into the role of an attentive father who helped with homework and played cricket in the garden. Why did he love her so deeply for so long? Because Jerry brought a grounded, unpretentious warmth that Jagger desperately needed to survive the sheer madness of his global fame. She didn't treat him like a mythic god or a temperamental artist. She treated him like her partner. Her quick Texan wit matched his razor-sharp British sarcasm, keeping him constantly grounded. Furthermore, she had an uncanny ability to navigate his famous frugality and perfectionism with light-hearted humor. She was a stunning fashion icon who looked incredible on his arm at red carpet premieres, but at home, she was a loving, stabilizing anchor who provided him with a quiet sanctuary where he could drop the exhaustingly intense Mick Jagger persona entirely. He loved her because she helped him survive himself. During the peak and alcohol excesses of the late 70s, Hall provided the steady hand that helped him pivot toward a far healthier, endurance-driven lifestyle. She managed the complex logistics of his sprawling household and family life, while he conquered stadiums across the globe year after year. Despite their lavish 1990 Hindu wedding ceremony in Bali, which was later declared legally invalid during their eventual split, they lived as a true husband and wife in every meaningful sense of the word for more than 2 full decades. Yet, loving Mick Jagger over a long stretch of time meant enduring the reality of his insatiable appetite for female attention on the road. For years, Jerry tolerated his nomadic lifestyle and frequent public indiscretions, holding the home front together through pure willpower and devotion. But in 1999, the breaking point finally arrived when news broke that Jagger had fathered a child with a Brazilian model. Humiliated in the global press, Hall drew a firm line in the sand and filed for a separation, bringing an end to the longest romantic era of Jagger's entire life.
Last week, Mick Jagger's wife, Jerry Hall, threw in the towel on Mick's wild ways and finally filed papers to end their rocky 8-year marriage. Mick's dancing around the law by claiming he and Jerry were never legally married.
The split was painful and splashed across tabloid front pages everywhere, but the fundamental warmth of their connection never fully died out. Over the following years, they transitioned into remarkable co-parents and genuinely close friends, frequently spending holidays together with their children. Jerry Hall gave Jagger the closest thing he ever experienced to a conventional family life, showing him that real love wasn't just about dramatic late-night passion. It was built on shared laughter, enduring friendship, and the quiet comfort of a home. Yet, after the long domestic chapter with Jerry came to a close, Mick's heart was destined for a far deeper, more quiet connection. One that would end in an unexpected heartbreak that shook him to his core. Loren Scott, the quiet soulmate and the heartbreak that shook his world. After the high-stakes celebrity circus of the 70s and 80s, Mick Jagger entered a very different season of his life in the early 2000s. The wild bachelor days were behind him, his children were growing up, and the Rolling Stones had solidified their status as the grand statesman of global stadium rock. He didn't need another wild high society star or a frantic spotlight romance. What he needed was someone who understood the rare world he occupied without being consumed by it. He found that rare sanctuary in Loren Scott, a towering 6'3" former model turned brilliant fashion designer. When they met on a photo shoot in 2001, Jagger wasn't just captivated by her striking stature and effortless elegance. He fell for a woman whose quiet grace, intense creativity, and absolute independence matched his own quiet interior life. Their 13-year relationship was unlike any Jagger had experienced before. It was remarkably private, grounded, and intensely collaborative. Loren wasn't looking for Mick to build her brand. She was already a force in high fashion, dressing Hollywood royalty like Nicole Kidman, Sarah Jessica Parker, and Penelope Cruz. But together, they formed a deep creative synergy. Scott became the mastermind behind Jagger's spectacular, custom-designed stage wardrobe during the Stones' massive 50th anniversary tours. She crafted intricate, feather-trimmed jackets and shimmering tailored coats that gave him an unmistakable, majestic presence under the stadium lights. Behind every explosive performance was Loren, meticulous and devoted, adjusting a hem or tweaking a design until it perfectly suited his famous movement. Why did he love her so deeply? Because Loren was his true equal, a woman of towering talents who protected his peace. She was fiercely proud, extraordinarily generous, and had a soft, nurturing soul beneath her commanding exterior. For 13 years, she was his anchor, his partner, and his best friend. She created quiet, elegant homes for them in London, Paris, and New York, shielding him from the constant noise of the outside world. For a man who had spent decades surrounded by people who wanted a piece of the Mick Jagger myth, Loren loved the private man behind the famous mouth. She gave him stability, sophisticated companionship, and an unconditional creative partnership that brought a profound sense of calm to his later years. Then, in March 2014, tragedy struck with a brutal, unimaginable force. While Jagger was on tour with the Rolling Stones in Australia, Loren tragically took her own life in her Manhattan apartment at the age of 49.
Today, Loren Scott, a fashion designer who was also Mick Jagger's girlfriend, was found dead in her New York apartment.
The news shattered him entirely. For the first time in his public life, the indestructible rock icon was rendered completely helpless by grief. The Stones immediately canceled their tour dates as Jagger rushed back to New York, issuing a rare, heart-wrenching statement. "I am still struggling to understand how my lover and best friend could end her life in this tragic way. We spent many wonderful years together and had made a great life for ourselves." The depth of his love for Loren became even clearer in how he chose to honor her memory. He established a permanent fashion scholarship in her name at London's prestigious Central St. Martin's School to support future young designers, ensuring her artistic legacy would endure forever. Years after her passing, he continued to wear her custom-designed jackets on stage during world tours, keeping her close to him in the very place where they had collaborated most passionately. Loren Scott wasn't just another romantic chapter in the life of a famous rock star. She was the quiet soulmate who held his heart in his mature years, proving that true love could be deeply peaceful, profoundly creative, and devastatingly permanent. How does a man who has lived through such immense public triumph and private heartbreak find the courage to open his heart once again in his 70s? Melanie Hamrick, the youthful energy and late chapter renewal. In the wake of devastating grief, most people in their 70s would quietly pull back from the world, content to let the curtains close on their romantic lives. But Mick Jagger has spent over 8 decades defying every biological and social expectation ever placed on a human being. Enter Melanie Hamrick, an accomplished American ballet theater dancer more than 40 years his junior. When they first crossed paths in early 2014, backstage at a Rolling Stones concert in Tokyo, Just weeks before heartbreak struck his world, neither could have predicted that a casual introduction between two elite performers would bloom into the most grounding, enduring partnership of Jagger's twilight years. Their connection deepened slowly and quietly, away from the prying eyes of the global press. By late 2014, they were officially together, bonded by a shared, rigorous physical discipline that very few people outside their rarefied world could truly understand. As a prima-level ballerina, Hamrick spent her entire life training her body to perform under extreme pressure, adhering to brutal physical regimens that mirror the jaw-dropping athletic stamina Jagger still displays on stadium stages well into his 80s. She didn't view him as an aging rock legend. She saw a fellow elite athlete who refused to slow down. Why does he love her so deeply in this late chapter of his life? Because Melanie brought an intoxicating wave of youth, vitality, and unburdened joy back into a world that had been darkened by grief. She didn't carry the emotional baggage of his wild 70s jet-set years or the intense media scrutiny of his earlier high-profile marriages. Instead, she offered him a completely fresh start. In December 2016, when Jagger was 73 years old, they welcomed their son, Devereaux Octavian Basil Jagger. Becoming a father again at that stage in his life didn't exhaust Jagger. It completely rejuvenated him. Melanie created a warm, mobile home base that allowed Jagger to balance late-life fatherhood with the relentless demands of headlining sold-out stadium tours across the globe. He loves her because she possesses her own creative drive and fiercely guards her independence. After retiring from the American Ballet Theatre in 2019, Hamrick successfully reinvented herself as a published author, writing steamy, high-stakes romance novels set in the cutthroat world of professional ballet. She handles the massive age gap between them with dry, unbothered humor, famously shrugging off public opinion by pointing out that Jagger's daily physical energy easily outpaces people half his age. In Melanie, Mick found someone who keeps him young, keeps him laughing, and gives him a vibrant family life that fuels his unstoppable stage presence. She represents the ultimate testament to his eternal youth, proving that love in your late 70s and 80s isn't about looking backward at what used to be, but eagerly embracing the next grand adventure. The cinematic screen, actor, visionary, and Hollywood producer. For any ordinary human, dominating the global music industry, filling massive open-air stadiums across 5 continents, and shaping 60 years of rock culture would be more than enough to satisfy a life's ambition. But Mick Jagger has never operated like an ordinary human being. Beyond the microphone stand, the stadium catwalk, and the blinding stage lights, Jagger harbored a fierce, burning passion for a completely different artistic medium: global cinema. He didn't just want to be a rock legend who occasionally popped up in glossy movie cameos. He wanted to conquer the silver screen as a dramatic lead, a chameleon actor, and ultimately, a powerful Hollywood producer who could greenlight major cultural projects behind the scenes. His love affair with the movie world kicked off during the height of the swinging 60s, right when his romantic connection with Marianne Faithfull was expanding his intellectual boundaries. In 1970, he made a staggering acting debut in Nicholas Roeg's avant-garde masterpiece, Performance, playing Turner, a reclusive, fading rock icon living in a surreal, dreamlike haze. Jagger brought a raw, dangerous, and deeply unsettling charisma to the screen, proving instantly that his magnetism wasn't just a byproduct of playing loud electric guitars. He followed that critical success by taking on the lead role in Tony Richardson's Australian outlaw biopic, Ned Kelly, 1970, trading his London velvet coats for a rugged bushranger armor. Throughout the following decades, Jagger continuously chased film roles that challenged the public's perception of him. He wasn't afraid to take absurd risks or play against type. He tackled sci-fi thrillers like Freejack, 1992, stepping into the shoes of a sinister futuristic mercenary, and delivered a remarkably nuanced, worldly performance alongside Andy Garcia in the 2001 indie drama The Man from Elysian Fields. Acting gave him an essential creative outlet away from the Rolling Stones, a place where he didn't have to carry the heavy weight of the Mick Jagger stage persona and could instead disappear entirely inside someone else's story. However, Jagger's sharp business instincts and restless creative drive eventually pulled him toward an even bigger role, mastering the art of film production. Recognizing that real power in Hollywood sits in the producer's chair, he founded his own production company, Jagged Films, in the 90s. He didn't build the company as a vanity project. He rolled up his sleeves, navigated complex budget meetings, and secured major distribution deals for ambitious scripts. Through Jagged Films, he produced the acclaimed World War II code-breaking thriller Enigma, 2001, starring Kate Winslet, personally hunting down rights, working closely with legendary screenwriter Tom Stoppard, and meticulously managing production logistics. Jagger's love for cinema went far beyond basic narrative features. He was obsessed with telling rich, complex stories about musical culture and civil rights history. In 2014, he served as a primary producer on Get On Up, the powerful feature biopic about the life of his musical idol James Brown, starring the late Chadwick Boseman.
Made a movie about the one and only James Brown. That time is now, and the somebodies are big too. Mick Jagger and producer Brian Grazer. And the film opening up today is Get On Up.
Jagger threw his full weight behind the project, ensuring the film captured the authentic, unvarnished brilliance of Brown's legacy. He pushed even further into prestige television, joining forces with legendary director Martin Scorsese to co-create and produce HBO's high-octane 70s music drama, Vinyl. Why did he love the film industry so passionately? Because movies offered him an intellectual puzzle that music alone could no longer provide. On stage, Jagger possessed absolute godlike control over 80,000 screaming fans. But in cinema, he was part of a delicate, collaborative ecosystem of writers, directors, set designers, and editors. It forced him to think analytically, exercise immense patience, and build narratives that would outlive the noise of a single concert tour. Through acting and producing, Mick proved that his creative genius wasn't tied solely to a stadium sound system. He was a master storyteller whose vision translated effortlessly onto the big screen. Now, with all the women who shaped his heart, the timeless songs he wrote, and the movie empire he built, only one ultimate question remains. How did the entire world fall so completely, madly in love with Mick Jagger in return? Why the world loved him back. When you strip away the tabloid headlines, the glittering jet-set marriages, and the Hollywood movie sets, a fundamental truth remains. Mick Jagger did not just live a rock and roll life. He created the entire blueprint for what a rock frontman could be. His romantic soul didn't exist in a vacuum. Every love affair, every heartbreaking split, and every quiet domestic sanctuary filtered directly into the music of the Rolling Stones, creating a timeless soundtrack that has resonated across 4 generations. The women he loved weren't just passengers in his story. They were the muses behind classic anthems. The vulnerability he shared with Marianne Faithfull birthed the raw imagery of Sister Morphine. The fiery glamour of Bianca Jagger fueled the strutting disco rock era of Miss You. The heartbreak of loss and splits gave his vocals an unmistakable emotional weight that made tracks like Wild Horses and Angie sound like bleeding wounds turned into poetry. Why did the world fall so madly in love with him in return? Because Jagger gave audiences something no other performer ever had: absolute, uninhibited freedom. Before Mick Jagger took the stage in the early 60s, singers stood politely behind a microphone stand, singing stiffly in suits. Jagger demolished that barrier. He turned stage performance into a hyper-athletic, visceral art form. He studied the explosive physical movements of James Brown and Tina Turner, transforming his slender frame into a swirling dervish of energy, hip rolls, and raw charisma. When Jagger strutted down a stadium catwalk in front of 80,000 screaming fans, he wasn't just singing a song, he was offering a vehicle for the audience's deepest desires for rebellion, passion, and joy. The world loved him because he refused to conform to the biological rules of aging. Where other rock icons faded into nostalgia or retired to quiet estates, Jagger maintained an iron discipline that would make professional Olympic athletes blush. Well into his 80s, he continued to sprint miles across stadium stages, night after night, belting out 2-hour sets with the pitch-perfect vocal control and boundless endurance of a man half his age. He gave his fans a gift far greater than music. He gave them proof that passion and vitality do not have an expiration date. To watch Mick Jagger on stage is to watch a human being defeating time itself. The global public's 6-decade love affair with Mick Jagger comes down to reciprocity. He gave his heart to a select few in his private life, the muses, the partners, and the soulmates who anchored his world. And in doing so, he poured that emotional intensity directly onto the stage. He held nothing back. The swagger was real, the sweat was real, and the music was eternal. Mick Jagger gave the world his youth, his heart, and his soul. And in return, the world crowned him the undisputed, forever king of rock and roll. From the counterculture spirit of Marianne Faithfull to the modern grounding presence of Melanie Hamrick, these 5 women didn't just share Mick Jagger's life. They helped shape the music, style, and legend of rock's most enduring frontman. Behind the swagger, his real journey has always been about passion, art, and connection. Which of these iconic eras is your personal favorite? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into rock history.